Thanks for joining us once again on another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Sessions podcast. This is episode 191. We sit down with a returning podcast guest, but also dear friend Edwin Martinez. Now, Edwin is the CEO of Onyx Coffee, which is a Guatemalan green coffee exporter and importer. He's also significantly impacted the specialty coffee industry as a whole over the last 2 decades. In this episode, we dive into the current state of the industry, but also some of the impacts of the rising sea market price, the pros and cons of it, the potential impacts of tariffs, but also the uncertainties that face the specialty coffee industry over the next year. Now, this conversation turned out to be a little challenging. It's definitely not going to be an easy listen. There's a lot of information, and I think we really hope that with this episode, those who own coffee roasting companies, coffee shops, but also really any business in the coffee industry, that they could use this information to strategically plan for a very uncertain future. And if you listen through the whole episode, you'll realize that this next year might be really challenging and difficult for the coffee industry. Anyways, let's just get into this. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Sergi's outfits on the pod has become a talking point, a talking piece for our fellow listeners. So
yeah,
as you can see, the hat has to be perfectly leveled on.
Well, I'm gonna make you look good here because like you just can't. This is breaking the rules, blue and black, and I'm like, I'm not gonna wear this, but I'm cold, so I am.
It's gonna look good on the.
And I thought, from here up, but nope,
color.
This
Shorts.
is great.
All right,
that's great.
Let's go.
Yeah. It's great. All righty. Friends, thank you for joining us once again on another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Sessions podcast. We have a dear friend, a guest, coming back for the second time on our podcast, entire podcast, show, I guess. Last time he was drinking from a cupping bowl. Today we actually give him a normal cup to drink from.
This is a beautiful cup.
That's great. All righty. Well, before we get into this, because there's going to be a lot that we'll cover, let's pour some batchy. Let's pour some drip coffee. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah. Mark, with that said, did you change anything on the recipe because you needed to brew?
No,
three.
I use the same recipe, the same everything. So we just might actually finish everything that's in the carafe this time, as opposed to sometimes there's like just some extra left that we don't get to.
I think we're done.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Well, savoring every sip of this batch brew. So
I don't think I've had this coffee since like we just dialed it in. I'm pretty sure I know what this is.
I don't know. Serge, what are you getting on this since?
I like this coffee. This would be like an ideal daily driver for me because it still has very nice acidity, but it's like dried fruit sweetness, really like that, and like stone fruit sweetness, which we've commonly, especially in a lot of cuppings, like for example, for the narrative cupping, Mark and I have been talking about this on multiple episodes. Mm-hmm. It seems like when someone else cups our coffees and get flavor notes, it's usually some kind of floral, some kind of round, juicy stone fruit, and it means we're happy.
Yeah, that's it.
That's about it.
Happy.
Yeah, it's so funny.
It's like floral, juicy, stone fruit equals happy.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I didn't smell this as a fragrance. I'm just smelling the brewed, and sometimes I get more in fragrance. Sometimes I get more in breaking the crust in the cupping than a fragrance. But I can taste what I imagine you might smell in the fragrance, the floral, and then the juicy's there to support that. Yeah, the juicy stone fruit.
This is great. I like it. I'm actually really enjoying this.
Yeah.
It's like just this really solid daily driver. It has some nice brightness on it. Also has a decent body to kind of hold it and carry it. Definitely some interesting like stone fruit coming through as well. So I just zero complaints.
Is this our
I'll
coffee?
take this. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Wow.
So,
Right,
Edwin,
it's hitting different.
because you mentioned the crust. We just came back from Guatemala together. which was a very enjoyable trip.
It was awesome.
I've thought back to a few times. And we cupped in the same cupping room. And I'm curious, like, do you get all of your flavor notes on the taste, or can you just take in aromas and pretty much go from there? I know, for example, like I've cupped with Shay from Woods,
right.
and he's like, he'll smell it all and he pretty much has all of his cupping notes almost. And I'm like, that's fascinating. And sometimes for me, I'm like, I can smell and almost get kind of everything I need. And then some days I like come and I'm like, I can't figure it out. And then once I taste, I can. So I don't know. Do you lean towards any direction, or?
I mean, so on the traditional SCA cupping form, and what I've been most familiar with, the fragrance and aroma combined are 10% of the score. And so you can choose to split that at, that means 5% is fragrance, 5% aroma. I don't think my sense of smell is probably as good as Shay's, or a lot of people. I just think I don't have the best sense of smell.
Okay.
So I don't lean on that too much. Some of our team internally was kind of making fun and questioning some of my note taking, because it's really simple. I'll just put an F, a small f, lowercase, if I smell something. If I smell something and I like it a little bit, then I'll put a plus. And if it's a mild smell and I like it a lot, I might put 2 pluses. Or if I don't like it, a minus or 2 minuses. If it's an intense smell, now it's a capital F. And if I like it, I'll put a plus. If I like it a lot, I might put 2. I sometimes have a capital F and 2 minuses.
Yeah, that's great.
Usually that is going to be in alignment with what I'm tasting, but it's not always the case. Often I may not smell much, and then I'll taste and get a lot more that I enjoy. And some of that has to do with, like, we just cupped, John set it up, and Maddie, Ty, and I cupped 32 coffees day before yesterday. Today's Thursday, yeah. And on the first 16, I smelled pretty soon, right after grinding. And then on the remaining, it was probably about 3 or 4 minutes. Someone else had smelled it, and I came through, and so I didn't get as much from the fragrance there. Yeah, I tend to try and move quickly and get an initial thought, and I'll kind of lock in on that and just keep going.
Yeah.
And then I'll circle back to validate, do I still agree with myself?
Yeah. I find myself doing something very similar to that. I do like your little kind of key and code to how you evaluate, like, especially when you mentioned like intensity and just the fragrance of it with like, that's very interesting. I'll definitely take in notes on that and try to create a key. I created a key on like so if we're cupping coffees in this room, we usually are cupping like a production roast, and most of the time Mark will set something up that I'm completely blind, like, don't know anything about these coffees, even though I assume they're probably some production roasts.
Yeah.
And when I am going around and cupping, I just have emojis as a key for things.
That's fun.
Very millennial of me.
Yeah.
So like I have like the nose emoji for like all of my fragrance for aromas, that is. And for, wait, which one is wet smells? Aromas?
Fragrance is dry.
Dry, yeah,
and
for
aroma's
fragrance,
wet.
and aromas wet. So for my aromas, I use like a little drip emoji and then rank that. So stuff like that. But the whole plus and minus thing, that's a very good thing to keep in mind. Probably be adding that to my cupping notes now.
Yeah. So the lower and uppercase is reflecting strength or intensity, and the plus and minus reflect quality. How agreeable or pleasant is it, or is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. That's very cool.
And a lot of times I won't put anything. That's one step short of putting an F with no plus or minus, where I smell something, but I'm not sure if I like it or dislike it. I'm not sure. I'll just put an F, but I smell something. And sometimes I'll just put nothing. And that I find is often safer. I think we want to say something a lot of times, but if we don't have something that's accurate or meaningful, sometimes it's better just to not.
Yeah, very smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I'm just like, finish this. Oh, almost done. And I'm like, I should have brewed some more batch.
Yeah.
Like there's just not enough, and it just tasted so
I haven't
good.
had enough coffee, so this is really nice.
Yeah, this is actually a Guatemalan coffee. You know, as we should have brewed, as they should have been. Sourced with the help of, Onyx, and Edwin's team. This is a coffee from Jorge Mendez.
Nice.
Yeah, it's great.
This is so good.
Yeah, it's great.
We've been talking about Jorge's coffees quite a bit, especially with our roasting approach. So, and this is great.
Yeah, and I think, like, oddly enough, like, this coffee just shines, like, I don't know why, like, after it's been sitting roasted, sitting for like a month plus. I don't know what happens, but it's like that one time you brewed me.
Oh, that was
the Jorge Mendez. I still feel like maybe you had like something contaminated in your vessel, was my
cup
or something.
Dirty? Yeah,
but I was like, when you let me try it, I was like, there's no way this is. Yeah. Because I didn't know what it was. I'm like, it's just not the guac, because it's just so. And then it was, and I was like, wow, this is.
It was like 5 weeks off a roast too.
This is great. Yeah. So
the density gives longer life. Yeah. Both green and roasted.
Interesting. Yeah. I've never thought about that. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to sleep tonight.
Maybe it's good that we didn't brew as much, so you won't be tempted with more coffee. But well, let's get right into this. Edwin runs Onyx, which is, you guys export and import, correct?
Yep.
And we just want to cover a few of the recent changes and all the uncertainty that's coming up with the C market, some tariff stuff. And it seems like, I know everybody in the industry is getting affected for sure. But it seems like exporters and importers are kind of the people that kind of have to manage, I guess, both sides of, like, hey, you're dealing with the producers, which are getting affected by it. And then you're also dealing with the roasters who are buying the coffee from you, which have their own series of, struggles or things that they have to deal with. And you guys are kind of almost holding both sides of the chain almost. Give us a little snippet as to a little bit about both what Onyx does, but then what that experience has been like for you guys, with all the changes going on.
Well, there's a lot there. But you got it. Onyx, we exist. Our mission is to elevate people in coffee. And it was born out of really taking coffee from our farm, Finca Vistahermosa, in Huehuetenango, and connecting it directly to roasters. And then after learning a lot of things the hard way, making a lot of mistakes, not just in the beginning, but every year, and really reflecting and learning, seeing that there's a big challenge and opportunity to connect people that want to be connected. And I realized, being bilingual, multicultural, being very interested in business, and willing to take some risks, being able to connect our coffee from our farm to some roasters was something that was not likely to be replicated by too many people. And I saw that as a problem. It's a lack of access for both producers and for roasters. And particularly seeing that there was some really great quality that was just getting lost, and the coffee effectively was delicious, getting blended, and the deliciousness was lost. And that quality became anonymous. And it's valuable. Every coffee has a home. There's different types of homes. And sometimes really high quality coffees add a lot of value to lift up a larger quantity of lower quality coffees to get to a certain profile blend that a lot of the majority of the market commercially is looking for. And so those producers are rarely paid based on the quality. And often the quality, a higher quality, does have a higher cost. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the aim was more to understand what is cost of production for others compared to ours and how to support that in a sustainable way. So that's Onyx in a nutshell, but we are exporting out of Guatemala and to a handful of countries, and then Onyx in the United States importing. And so I think the big questions you asked about the market and tariffs are, I could talk about that for hours.
Yeah.
That's been what we've been talking about for some time. But today is April 17th as we're talking here.
That's smart to date it.
And
timestamp it. Yep.
Right.
Very
so
smart.
I'll just throw out a couple of some highlights here.
Mm-hmm.
So around Thanksgiving, like end of November, we had a plan, and that everything changed at that point. The market started climbing end of November, and it continued to climb. And we work with a lot of roasters that were wanting to wait for the market to come back down. And so the market coming from being in the C market in the $2 range and then going into the threes, people thought, let's wait for it to come back down, and it went up and went up and went up. Since then, it peaked around 440, has come back down and is going back up. But I think it created a lot of concern because this is volatility that we've just not seen. Not only in a long time, but if you track it, we've just never had this level of volatility.
Yep.
So there's two separate, prior to even getting into tariffs, two separate very challenging things. One is a higher price for the buying side, and the other is volatility. And volatility is that it's going up and down.
Yep.
And so I want to separate the two first, and just a few comments on the high price. High is a very relative word because in the last 15 years, I found that as we've paid a premium above the market, the costs have climbed higher to the point that the premiums that we've paid have become slightly less and less interesting, but still compelling. And so we've been able to have really good long-term relationships with producers and roasters. But the challenge with, I think, the context of what is a higher price, and the cost of coffee going up is a big topic that we're seeing in the news. But I like to take a step back and just acknowledge first, the cost of everything else has gone up except for coffee.
Right. Yeah, that's good context.
So coffee going up right now is just trying to catch up. If you think about on the retail side, labor, lease, utilities, cost of paper cups, cost of your ceramics, cost of everything.
Yeah.
And I'm saying it's gone up relative when we compare it to 6 months ago. Coffee was not that much different in price to the time when I was born, almost 50 years ago.
Wild.
What of these other things cost the same amount almost 50 years ago, even 10 years ago? None of them.
Yeah, especially things
Wow.
that, are crucial to logistics. Like I'm thinking like gas prices, right? Those are going to increase costs overall, all of production costs across the board.
Yeah.
And to see those prices gradually and consistently rise, and coffee not being, equal or, parallel to that rise is, it's confusing.
Yeah. So 20 years ago, you could make a case to get into coffee as a producer to maybe make money. But it was pretty risky. And it's something that I probably wouldn't have recommended. As time has passed, that opportunity is more and more challenging. I would say impossible. A lot of what's made coffee seem to be sustainable, and this gets pretty deep and complex and political even, But a lot of what makes coffee seem to be sustainable is that it's subsidized in some way, shape, or form, because in the case of Guatemala, with higher labor costs, which our labor on our farm went up 53% 2 years ago.
Wow.
That's a big jump.
Yeah.
And now it's not even about the cost. It's just finding people to pick. And so the challenge is just being able to have and pick coffee. And so there's a lot that's loaded into that have, talking about climate change. Are we even going to have a harvest? Mm-hmm. And then when we have it, are we going to be able to get it off the trees? And so these are pieces that I think when we consider the cost of coffee, it's more than what we've been accustomed to for a long time.
Yep.
The true cost of production is more than what people think. And so that, I think, is a new era that we're processing and contemplating. What does it look like to be sustainable at a level where costs can be covered, recognizing what the costs actually are? And there's a lot of hard to measure things, like what is the cost, environmentally speaking. Mm-hmm. And the other piece is separate from prices. I think the volatility, it creates tremendous disruption in the supply chain. So if you're used to buying or selling with the same person, and you have a good relationship, all of a sudden, when the market price goes up a lot or down a lot, there tends to be one party who's more of a winner and the other one's more of a loser.
Yep.
So every time the market moves a lot, anywhere in the supply chain where there's a purchase and sale, you have this sense of someone is winning more or someone's losing more. And when that happens, if you're losing more, you don't want to. And so you try and find a better outcome. And so then there's a shift and a change in where a product moves and who's actually buying and selling it. Now it's someone different.
Yeah.
And someone may be counting on things not changing. Mm-hmm. And so it creates a ripple effect of disruption.
Yeah.
On traceability, on the availability, on quality. And ultimately, I think one of the things that I've valued and still value very much, and it's been philosophically a core principle, is really just valuing long-term relationships and long-term commitments, building stability, predictability. And that's how we've grown, and that's what I see as our future as well. But right now, that's actually very risky. It's risky to have a long-term commitment for us on procurement as well as sales. Mm. And so the risks are defaults on both ends. A default means a producer does not deliver what they've committed to deliver.
Yeah.
Because maybe their coffee is actually a combination of their brother, son, daughter-in-law, sister, and uncle, and they've all decided to actually sell their coffee right off the patio to a stranger who's paid cash last week. Sorry, I didn't tell you, brother.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, okay, well, you did what's in your best interest, and so, it's hard to argue with that.
Yeah.
When you're in a place where you're not covering costs. Mm-hmm. So the volatility creates almost a ripple effect of increasing complexity, inefficiency, on top of increased costs. So where does that land consumers? It's paying more for uncertainty, paying more sometimes for lower quality. Mm-hmm. It's harder to find good quality. And that's true in anytime the market's higher. It's harder to find quality. It seems counterintuitive, but if you're growing something and you can sell it at X, and all of a sudden someone's willing to pay you twice that, and they don't care about the quality, how hard are you going to work to produce what you've been producing in terms of quality?
Right.
Let me ask you about you mentioned, hey, for like coffee drinkers, and it's going to mean paying a little extra and probably not paying extra in the traditional sense that we think, oh, if you pay, a few dollars more, you're going to get a few dollars more of quality or whatever, some metric. And also looking at what you said about, hey, the prices has nearly stayed the same for the last, 50 years or whatever. Does that mean that, we've overindulged almost on coffee, and that coffee itself should, priced where it should be more of a rare experience than, hey, it's everywhere and it's everywhere for a few bucks? Does that make sense?
It does. It's a good question. It's a loaded question. And I think people that I respect a lot would probably give some very different answers. So it depends, are you a consumer or are you a producer? It depends on who's answering that question.
Right.
A consumer is going to value, well, I'll just leave it at that. Values value. And you can define that in any way you want.
Yeah.
Right? There's lots of ways to define value. As a producer, I would simplify it to, is this something that I'm excited to do again next year? And am I able to live off of this? And so there's a lot of producers that are passionate about what they're doing, but not really able to live off of what they're doing. Excuse me. So yes, I would say that the market largely has not covered cost over the last 15 to 20 years, which puts a lot of pressure on really having coffee flow through. It creates opportunity, I think, for direct relationships when the market price is below the cost of production, because there's enough that want to have a positive impact and will pay a price that will cover cost of production and allow some margin. But the volatility tends to test those relationships.
Right.
So right now we're halfway through April. About a month and a half ago, I was talking to a roaster that said they have, this is a roaster in the Pacific Northwest that's worked with one producer in Honduras for at least 10 to 15 years. And he had an agreement for a container of coffee that I think was in the low to mid $3 range FOB. And they were having a conversation when the market was easily $1 over that. And the roaster was thinking that the producer was going to default and say, I can't deliver this. We already sold it, or we're going to sell it somewhere else. Sometimes the way that message actually comes through is the harvest wasn't very good this year.
Yeah.
And that's actually true, that volumes are a little bit lower, but for all of it to be gone is a different thing. And so he was prepared. He gets on the call and he says, I've got your coffee and the quality is really good. And he said, okay, that's great. And he was trying to get some confirmation on if we're still on track, on the same page with the same pricing that they had agreed to. And he knew that it was very unlikely. And he said, no, yeah, we're good.
Wow.
And he was almost speechless. Like, this is how it's supposed to work, but I can't believe this is actually happening.
Yeah.
This is not really happening for anybody.
Yeah.
This is the ideal, but I'm not expecting this. And the reason is, if the price doesn't come back down, eventually that would recalibrate, right? Yeah. It wouldn't make sense for them to invest more and consistently deliver at a lower price than the market pays for lower qualities. So in this case, he ended up, after the call, he shares this with me, and then he had another call, and he said, do you need more coffee? I've got another container or two. And so the roaster's sharing this story with me, and I'm perplexed because he said he offered it at the same price. And so 2 containers at let's say $1 below market. So he's basically giving away what might be valued at $100,000 gap.
Yeah, difference. Wow.
And the roaster can't understand why this is happening.
Yeah.
And I can't either. When he's telling me the story, I'm like on the edge of my seat. So why? How?
That's the cat. Yeah.
And so the bottom line is, and this kind of explains a lot of the challenges we have right now as an industry. The cash is not there. There's a problem of lack of liquidity in the entire supply chain, from small companies to big companies. So just because someone's willing to pay it, they're likely not paying it right then and there. And so in this case, the reason that this unique circumstance existed is because this roaster has been paying in full for the entire container before it ships.
Oh, gotcha.
And people were saying, I'd rather have that money with certainty now than work through the supply chain that is showing increasing signs of delays that we've never experienced before. And my experiences are more just in Guatemala, but I know that it's a lot of similarities in a lot of other coffee growing countries where if you have some challenges, all of a sudden you go to the bank. The bank's in the headlines for struggling financially. People get their money out of the bank, all of it. They'll get in line and wait all day, sleep there, wait the next day, get their cash out, all of it, because they're afraid that that bank may go bankrupt. And so a green exporter or a dry mill is also using banks, and they're making payments through banks. So you have this challenge of lack of liquidity. What it causes is, in order to move product that has value through the supply chain, and there's lack of liquidity, everyone selling something is looking for flexibility in terms. Sorry, backwards. Everyone that's buying something is looking for flexibility in terms in their payments. And everyone that's selling something is looking for advance payments just to be able to deliver.
Right.
If there's one link in the supply chain that's doing both of those and no one else is doing anything different, that can work. The problem is every link in the supply chain is doing the same in both directions. And that just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
So with the market going up from being in the mid 2s to 4s and now around 4, for most parties in the supply chain, as we've paid a premium, the increase is not as much for us, but at a commercial level, you need twice the money to do the same amount of business.
Yep.
And a bank does not process or logically agree that that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming also from a bank standpoint, they're like, this is coffee. And it's a little more challenging. They're hedging the risk there a little more intentionally than, say, maybe like some kind of, tech company or something that has just a little bit way more wiggle room, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it would be weird. I mean, from a consumer point of view, like, I think to folks who are like, oh, okay, well, I don't run a business and this and that, like, this is so complex, wild, I had no idea. But I'm like, imagine if you, as a consumer, walked into a cafe, ordered a latte, and then said, yeah, I'll net 30 that.
Yeah.
And be like,
no, that's funny.
How would a cafe operate, on that? Or it'd be like, and it would definitely be in the cafe's interest to be like, man, like, if like doing the numbers and you're looking at like, okay, I have like tabs open on 20% of my customers and there's money shelled up. I mean, we do the same thing when we're looking at our draft, invoices that are open and sitting and like waiting for, clients to pay. And it's like, okay, well, if that cashes in this month, that's going to make a good month. If it cashes in next month, then we have to figure out how to wait that period. And I think you're right. When there's this lack of liquidity in the whole industry, it does just in general create even more volatility in price and even more fluctuation in price. And it almost feels like there is, quote unquote, like you can't find the end of the rope. Like how do you actually like, find the end of the rope so you can untangle all of this? So it makes things even more complicated. And then you add on the situation with tariffs.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there.
Okay.
We'll get into that in a moment. But just to take one step back. So at a high level, like why is the market higher? I want to just share some thoughts on that. And I'm not an expert, not an analyst, not an economist, but Brazil produces about a third of global production. There's a cumulative shortage in Brazil. And so I'm just going to round and use some loose numbers. Let's say that they're 30% of global production. And let's say their production is down 10%. That means global production is down 3%. If Brazil's down 20%, now global production is down 6%. That may not seem like a big number, but demand has not gone down.
Yeah.
It's maintained and slowly grown. And so whatever that drop is of supply, you have to take that plus the increase in demand, and that's your gap. So we've had a little bit of a gap for several years in a row. What that does, combined with the higher market, is importers, roasters, aren't long anymore, meaning they're not making long-term commitments because it's expensive right now. I'm going to wait for it to come down. I'm not going to make a commitment too far in the future. I'm going to shorten how far out my commitments go. And I would say that's generally a wise, safe thing to do, except people were doing that when the market started coming up, thinking it would come down, and it kept going up and it kept going up. And so people are shorter globally than they've, I want to say ever been, but than they've been in a long time. Most companies are shorter than they've ever been since they started.
Shorter in commitments or then shorter in quote unquote inventory or stock?
Both.
Gotcha.
They're forward commitments, the obligations, that mutual commitments they have for coffee to be delivered, and what they actually have in their physical inventory.
Yeah.
So this cumulative shortage is this gap between supply and demand is a fundamental reason for price increase. And so when the price is high and buyers are getting shorter and shorter, that means if you have less of something, you're going to run out faster.
Yeah.
And more people are going to run out faster, so that the quantity of people that are ordering and the frequency of orders are higher. Doesn't mean more coffee is being consumed. It's just people are running more hand to mouth in the entire supply chain.
Yeah.
And when roasters are doing that, that means there's a stronger demand for spot. The trouble is importers have less spot. A month ago, we had about 10% of what we had a year prior. A month ago, I went to NCA, got to meet Bill Murray, who formed the first caucus of a bipartisan to essentially lobby for getting rid of tariffs on coffee.
Yeah.
And I spoke with the managing director for Continental Terminals, and he has a pretty good pulse because they are warehousing a pretty high percentage of coffee in North America. What they're not warehousing, they have a pretty good idea on what those volumes are. That combined with actual stock, certified stock reports. He said about a month ago that he said a year ago, there was about 6 million bags of coffee in the United States. Today, we're at 3 million. And in a month, we maybe will have half of that. So having a certain volume and then in a year going to half, and then in another 30 days going to half again.
Very big decline.
So I asked him, I said, Bob, what will happen in another 30 days if we drop 1.5 million bags down to just 1.5 million? Can you imagine the warehouses being empty? And his eyes got big. He's like, I can't. That won't happen. And the reason it won't happen is because there's a lot of coffee on the water. The problem is what's coming, what's landing, what's on the water, it's all sold. There are many small, mid-size, and large multinationals that aren't planning to have any spot.
Wow.
But there's more demand for spot than ever before.
Yep.
So what all this does is it creates less wiggle room in the entire supply chain. And so when there's a little headline of something happening, then all of a sudden the reactions are exaggerated. So it creates a big challenge. So your comment about how to price the coffee, I love that, because I don't think this is where we should go, but I think we should think about things this way. What if every cup of coffee was sold at X plus a differential, which I like to think about and build a business where you're covering cost of production and not on a market price, because the market doesn't have anything to do with the cost of production. But it is a very real communicator of the gap between supply and demand.
Yeah.
So you could say at a retail level, sell cups of coffee at a certain price plus plus a differential. I mean, no consumer would want to pay a different price for the same thing every day.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh, I pay 10 cents more today, or 50 cents more, 3 cents more, 15 cents less.
Yeah, and I think on the, like you were describing, like the differential on the production side. So you have shorter commitments and less volume because shorter commitments. Does that then also create volatility and fluctuation in production costs? Because I'm thinking like very, very practically here. If you're sourcing green coffee and you have shorter commitments, then you need to take more time to source coffee. And if you can't just go into a storage and pick up, coffee that's already at location, then you have to figure out how to do that. That's literally increasing labor right there. Yeah. More phone calls, more connections, and something that was stable and consistent is now being way more fragile and way softer and much more volatile. So those costs are now going up. And if costs at green are going up, costs at production are going up, we, from a cafe standpoint or selling bags of coffee, it's like we have to figure out how to raise those prices so that we can continue with the influx of production so that we can buy more coffee. And that seems like there is no quote unquote resolution. It just like kind of hurts my brain to think about it, because I'm like, what role do we play? Like, what role do us sitting in this room, and what can we do to help mitigate that, but also change how we think about sourcing coffee, because that's also going to play a major role in what you're talking about.
Before the market started going up, this is about a year and a half ago, I started thinking more and more about basically what you just identified and how important that is for economic stability and sustainability through the supply chain. And really it's about one word, and that's predictability. And that's what we don't have right now.
Yeah.
We have what you described is complexity and friction. And that adds uncertainty and cost. It doesn't add any more value in product or quality. So inefficiency adds cost. And so having less certainty means there's an unpredictable amount of added cost in the pipeline. And that makes it really hard to plan.
Yeah.
And so you do have added admin overhead work in the entire supply chain. But if you think of from a roasting and sourcing standpoint, if you can't make a few really great commitments throughout the year and count on them, you have to hustle and constantly find. And that's what more and more people are doing. The bigger the company is, the more they're doing that. And that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it's also a risk and a gamble, because you don't have your quantity, quality, and price planned out. You have to figure out, where am I going to get what I need for next month?
Yeah.
And this is companies that are used to planning 6, 9, 12, 18 months out, that are looking at, we really need to get something lined up for 60 to 90 days from now. And that adds a lot of cost.
Yeah.
What do you think? Let's say there's like a roaster listening to this, and I mean, it just doesn't sound easy in any way. No matter how you no matter how the cookie crumbles, it's just not easy. But a roaster is listening to this. Do you have any like recommendations or suggestions, or maybe you can spark some ideas that can help kind of balance a little bit of the rising cost, the inventory situation, but then managing their inventory and not being super long, but also not buying coffee on a day-to-day basis. What comes to mind that you can offer a roaster, maybe some ideas?
Yeah. So some of the same ideas, I think, when the market started going up, are what comes to mind doesn't change. It's just become more clear and louder, and that is, don't try and make a perfect plan, and stick to that first plan you made, and also don't not do anything. Do something. Maybe make that perfect plan, but be prepared to pivot as often as you need to. And the challenge is, more often than not, people will tend to err. People will tend to do one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm going to wait. I'm not going to do anything. I just need to wait. The market will come down. And when it's at the right time, then I'm going to do everything. Or I'm going to try and plan everything out. And then you make commitments, and you may get lucky. It may work out really well. It may end you.
Yeah.
And so neither of these are good. I'm not sure which one is worse. I think doing nothing is worse, because if you make a plan, you'll know that you're going to need to pivot pretty quick. If you don't make a plan, then you're just writing, decisions are made for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So really the recommendation is to make the best plan you can, and to be prepared to pivot and reevaluate everything that's relevant often. What I mean by relevant are, what are our costs operationally, and have conversations with customers and share information with them. This is what we're experiencing, and gain buy-in, so that you know who is wanting, willing, and able to go on a journey with you.
Mm-hmm.
And some are not wanting, and maybe they're able. Some are wanting and they're not able. Mm-hmm. They may or may not know that they're able or not able. Yeah. So that's a challenge for us, how to identify those who are wanting but not able.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who is a risk for us, that will be a default. We've made a mutual longer term commitment. And so I need to try and figure out my opinion and our opinion as a business in assessing their health that may not align with what they perceive their own health to be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to be honest about your health, and to share that with people mm-hmm. that you're working with, to ask them about their health. And that way together you can make decisions that are more realistic on including what's possible.
Yeah.
Versus trying to do something that is that's not possible.
Yeah.
Because when you go down that path, when you hit a hard point, it's more difficult to manage than if you lean into it earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Some of this, I think, applies perhaps to relationships.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a good time to go to tariffs.
Totally. Yeah.
So tariffs. So today's April 17th. So I was on the East Coast, and last week for over a week, and it kind of overlapped a period where a lot of things happened. So the U.S. administration announced on April 2nd that there would be tariffs kicking in at 12:01 a.m. April 5th, which was Saturday morning, or like late Friday midnight, Saturday morning. And that was confusing, because there was a list of reciprocal tariffs with a lot of different countries. And so these are tariffs. I'll take a step back here. So what is a tariff? Tariff is a duty. Tariffs can be charged at a country of export, by that country, it can also be charged by a country of import. And so this is by country of import, United States. And what is the tariff on? It's on the declared value of the goods that are imported. And so that's the invoice. If that includes marine freight, then you're paying a tariff on that. If it doesn't include that, and there's very big companies, I think, that have some content out there that disagree with me on this. I could be wrong. I don't think so. I don't know. That's part of the reality right now. Like, nobody knows because there's lack of clarity and there's so much change. But my understanding is that it's on the goods, on anything that is coming into the United States based on the commercial invoice for something where the BL date, and if there's transloading, so we have coffee that went from Guatemala and the ship actually went to Colombia first, maybe switched containers. And so it could actually be on that last date of loading. And so initially there was a reciprocal and then 10% base minimum. So in the beginning, I was unclear. Are we talking about 20% in Guatemala? Because there's the reciprocal that showed Guatemala 10%. Is that on top of the base of 10? And I wasn't sure for a few days. And then we came to a point of calibration, and then there was another from customs, some sheets that were shared listing reciprocal rates, and Guatemala was not on that list. So I'm thinking, okay, so we still have this base of 10. And then the reciprocals were put on pause. I think that was on the 9th. So where we're at right now is a 10% base across the board on imports into the United States. That interestingly applies also, we're talking about green coffee, that's all we do, but it also applies to roasted coffee. It applies to everything coming in. And for us, that's a really challenging thing because the risk assessment on the health of our partners is now elevated.
Yeah.
And the preparedness to manage that is something that really no one's prepared for. No one's prepared for that.
Yeah.
Someone that says they're prepared for it, I wonder
what information and data do you have that we don't?
Tell me more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've yet to meet someone that I think is prepared and has a great plan and is feeling good about it.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. And the uncertainty is, and this is the same for larger companies. If there's something en route and it lands and there's tariffs that are charged and then all of a sudden tariffs come off, it just can get really messy with more change. Yeah. It's a whole nother layer of volatility on pricing on top of the market volatility.
Yeah. Yeah. And then on top of that, there is no, like you were saying, because it's so volatile, there's no predictability. So you can't really predict the future of the market at all. Really, it's unpredictable. And then because it's happening at such a quick pace, I can't imagine what that looks like for a person who's slightly disconnected from the supply chain but depends on the supply chain. I'm thinking a multi-roaster cafe that was buying coffee at this price and it went up and then it goes down again because tariffs change or anything like that. I know from a very practical cafe management perspective, sometimes you hear these concepts, they're talked about, they're pretty heady, pretty complex, and you don't really know what to do with that when you're trying to price out your next list of pour overs, right? And then because you don't know what to do with that, you have a hard time communicating to the market that is going to affect that. And because things are happening so fast, it becomes just a challenge on all fronts, especially for, I'm thinking for the consumer. How does the consumer read the news, hear this podcast, and how do they respond to that? what do they do with that information? And how does that then drive the market and change it for the future? Because hopefully these tariffs are not a long-term thing, right?
Yeah.
So that means like in 6 months, the market is going to change again. And how will that change, and how will that define define the demand for coffee from a consumer point of view? So I'm like, there's a lot of those thoughts going through my head, but I really don't have a pathway to a planned resolution.
No one does.
No one does. Yeah.
I mean, just the market going up required us to figure out, how do we come up with another $2 or $3 million just to operate? And then tariffs kicking in. Now we need another $800,000 to $1 million that we weren't planning on. That's a new development in the last couple of weeks. And in selling green, we're working with the GCA, is the Green Coffee Association. So the GCA contract, which we include in our contracts, is essentially stating that if there are tariffs, 1, we will pay them, and 2, we will pass them on. The margins in the supply chain within just the green space are pretty slim. And so the idea of, first a seller or exporter absorbing that, I think is pretty unique and rare. That's not what's happening. The idea of it being absorbed by an exporter and or importer is also pretty, I say unique and rare, but we haven't paid a tariff yet. Today's April 17th. And so we can check in here in a week or two. We have an average of a container a week hitting the water for the rest of the year. It's not spread out exactly like that, but we don't have any experience to share of as of yet today. But in 1, 2, 3 weeks, we will either directly internally or with people that we're working with. And that's something that I think, people are very interested to hear, the first people that are paying tariffs with green coffee. Okay, what exactly is happening? What are you paying? Can you show us the bill? Or here's what we paid.
Because that then changes how, for example, for Onyx, how you negotiate green costs, right? And what, from a roaster's perspective, what can roasters listening to this expect in general from importing companies, from Onyx? And how can roasters, I guess I'm thinking like roasters at this point just need to have a little bit of grace in understanding negotiations are complicated. But practically speaking, like, what is the best thing for a roaster listening to this to do when they're approaching to buy green coffee and understanding that negotiation will change with something as volatile as the tariffs right now?
I think what I shared earlier when I got here, before we sat down, as we were just talking about other things in life, I think for me personally, a healthy exercise is to exaggerate the best and worst case scenarios. And so that's what I would suggest for a roaster, to exaggerate the best and worst case scenarios. If you're preparing for the worst, you're less likely to be in a hard place of surprise. It's a nice idea to hope for the best. And I think absolutely we should hope for the best and work hard to have the best possible outcomes, but to be prepared for the worst. And so for us, it gets complicated because we don't want to be a bank. We can't afford to be a bank, but that's what we're doing. And now the costs of operating have gone up a lot before tariffs, and now even more. And so this is a complicated topic. You're probably not going to hear anyone talking about this. But the conversation of who is financing tariffs. The reason no one's going to talk about it is because no one wants to pay a tariff. Much less talk about how to finance a tariff.
Yeah.
So when we sell 100% of what lands to someone and they pay for all of it the day it arrives, including the tariff, at that point, we don't have to think about it. Unless that's happening, and that almost never happens, there's a gap. And so as we pay more, there is the passing along of that cost. But if that cost isn't paid up front, so if a roaster has coffee financed for 6 months and there's a tariff on it, well, is the tariff financed, or is the roaster going to pay 100% of the tariff up front?
Yeah.
And then have the rest go as normal?
Yeah.
Or is the tariff spread out and then financing for the tariff, which we're talking about probably a couple pennies, but it's another cost.
Yeah, it adds up.
It adds up. Well, to us, it adds up to close to $1 million.
Yeah, especially at that kind of volume.
As we think, there's so much. This is like such a deep dive.
Yeah.
We're just going straight for just like a lot, and I think this will just be an interesting listen overall. As we land the plane, how do you think this is just gonna affect or impact the coffee industry for the end of 2025, 2026? Is this gonna leave some battle scars that lead us to shift how we do things or change how we do things, regardless if these increases stay or not? What do you think? And this is just pure, I'm curious, just speculation, just maybe educated, guess into the future.
Well, I think I would regret not being fully transparent about this, but I think we're going to see a lot of roasters go out of business. I hate to be doom and gloom. I know someone else that was executive director at SCA years ago, that he would get up. His name's Rick Reinhardt. He would get up and he would just doom and gloom. Coffee is in crisis. And I really enjoyed and appreciated that, because I think it sets the stage for being honest about real things that are hard. And so I do, unfortunately, feel that we're going to see a lot of roasters go out. And we're talking about roasters, but it's not just roasters. It's in the entire supply chain. When there's disruption, volatility, and high prices, that's just really challenging to navigate. We've seen a lot of exporters, importers, very large ones, go under. This is before tariffs, before the market went up.
Right.
And so when the market started going up, that became, the text messages I had with people at some of the biggest import companies, multinationals, it was scary. Because I realized the people with the most money in the world in this industry are out of money, or there's restrictions and they're not able to operate the way that they planned, and they have to make changes that are not the decisions that they wanted to make. So I think it's going to be challenging. I had a talk with someone in South America this morning that was saying that in the last 90 days, he's seeing it's weeding out. His words were weeding out the bad actors. And I wouldn't disagree with that, but I would add and say there's a lot of, including ourselves, there's a lot of really well-meaning companies that are struggling just the same.
Yeah.
It's this volatility doesn't discriminate.
Yeah.
It impacts everyone. So I think having a great plan and then making pivots and being willing to consider sometimes drastic pivots. Because if you project out and try and make the best plan possible, and then you realistically look, how do we get there? It helps you decide what changes to make today if you have more clarity on where you think you want to go given the current reality.
Right.
So it's a lot of soul searching, I think. 2025. I don't know how to answer your question other than I think the amount of uncertainty that we have means that we're going to continue to see more supply chain disruption, which includes companies. I mean, we've already seen a lot prior to this, and so I think we're just going to see some more of it for a season being a year or two. Some consolidation, and I think part of how we're going to continue to evolve and define sustainability is going to largely put more weight in a way that more people appreciate on things that provide stability and consistency. And having this much volatility makes it really hard to build a model of stability. Yeah. But it makes it more clear how important a model of stability is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just listening to you explain all of this, I think the story that you shared about the relationship between that roaster and was it the importing or exporting company?
This was a producer in
or a
Honduras.
producer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that story to me anchors in how I want to view the rest of 2025. It's a holding on from both sides, but it also requires both sides or all sides of the supply chain to be grounded and anchored in something. And if that doesn't happen, then it's going to be even more challenging for everyone. And I think if there was anything that I would be, especially for us at Mir, I think if there's anything that I would like us to really strongly accomplish in 2025, yeah, of course we want to grow our revenue, we want to grow our business, we want to see us like financially flourish. But if we can establish more systems or more things that would ground us through the challenges that we may continue experiencing throughout the year, I think that would also be beneficial to thinking of. You guys started the podcast talking about the visit to Guatemala and you hanging out with Jorge and hanging out with those families. Our stability as a roasting company is going to be a benefit to our friends in Guatemala.
100%.
And that's where I'm like, okay, if I can listen to that story and create a plan, okay, what choices can we make now to be more stable as a company? Then that means either Mark or I can go back and see Jorge next spring.
Yeah. And that kind of leads to, a question you had shared earlier is how does a roaster decide how long or short to be? And I think that really is answering where do we want to go and why? And then practically speaking, who depends on us? Who do we depend on? And having a mutual understanding of needs and health, and recognizing that in a supply chain, if one link is unhealthy, that's going to impact others. And that actually has a powerful impact on what happens in the industry. There are some larger companies that have essentially been acquired, not because one company wanted to acquire another one, but because if they didn't, it would hurt some shared suppliers that would then cause challenges that could be avoided if they perhaps acquired a company that they didn't necessarily want to acquire, but they can preserve stability and make an investment and more predictability in what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so anything that you can do with anyone that you're working with that can increase predictability is a positive thing. Yeah. It takes more conversations.
Yeah.
I think it's just like any relationship. When you go through something hard, it requires more understanding, communication, and proactive questions and listening in both directions.
Yeah. Totally. Well, that's great. That's a good way to wrap it up completely. Yeah. Again, it's always such a pleasure chatting with you. I think I was texting you before you got here. I'm like, dude, at least for me, when you come into the space of being on the podcast or anytime we chat, it feels like I'm talking to a father figure in coffee, at least from my, coffee journey and my coffee experience. So I thank you for that. whether it's been a lot or a little, you've kind of mentored us through running a roasting company to a degree and helped us make decisions when it comes to buying green. And you've just invested into us. So I personally, and on behalf of both of us, I would say, like, thank you for taking your time for the podcast, but also always just being available and being so raw and so honest in sharing things that are like super challenging.
Yeah. Well, thank you much. It's been a pleasure and a privilege, and I greatly appreciate the open conversation that I think allows for sometimes the best learning is from mistakes. And I've made a lot of them. So I feel I can share insights from those learnings and experiences.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, folks, there you have it. A great in-depth conversation. If you made it this far, thank you. That's a head full of information. But I'm going to wrap it up like we always do. Remember, reflect what's good.